That's pretty special. All right. First item to discuss is the post-secondary education system-wide. Oh, yes, and I do have, before we get started, Stuart, no, you can, this will just be a second. I'm not gonna really run on this one, but Stuart Little did provide us lunch today, so if you see, I don't see Stuart in the audience, so he didn't care enough to be part of the committee, but he did provide his lunch. So if you see him out in the hallway, be sure to thank him for that. This came from downstairs, as a matter of fact. All right, now, Brianna, let's go ahead and get us started on the post-secondary education system-wide.
Okay. Good morning. I have a list of questions for what we talked about last time. So I'm just going to talk about the questions, talk about the answers so that we can get familiar where we were last time. Senator Francisco asks about Smith Hall at KU. So in May 2022, KU submitted that Smith Hall be designated as an obsolete building to the Board of Regents to consider and requested an allocation of $650,000 from fiscal year 2023 from the Building Demolition Fund. The board approved KU's request, but to date, KU has not demolished that building. And then there is a list of demolished buildings. So you guys have this document right here that lists all of those demolished buildings. And then so we wanted to talk about the jump from 10 million to 90 million. And I just want to note that the Board of Regents is here. Chad Bristow is here he's the Director of Facilities. So if you guys wanted to speak with the agency about that, he is here. So the 10 million in fiscal year 2023 is the demolition money that is going to be transferred to the universities. The 90 million in 2024 is the educational building fund and the SGF request for enhanced funding. The governor did not concur with that 90 million. So they have 75 million for this year, and that's 45 million in educational building fund, 20 million in SGF, and then 10 million for SGF for demolition. And so I can stand for questions, or we can have Chad come up and speak to that if you would like.
All right, committee, are there any questions with the answers provided so far? Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my question was really, how is obsolete defined? And perhaps the board can answer that, but that was my question.
So they're working on an explanation, but I'm sure Chad can give you what their version of that is.
Okay, very good. Any questions for Brianna? Yes, Senator Reddy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'm also on taxation, and could you just one more time go over what's on the two building funds?
Oh, so for 2024, the governor recommended 75 million, and so they're getting 45 from the educational building fund, 20 million for capital renewal, and then 10 million for demolition.
And there's two building funds, correct?
Right now, we're talking about just the educational building fund.
Okay. I have a follow-up question, Mr. Chair. So in the taxation committee, we were discussing, we actually passed a bill out of taxation, which would remove the 1.5 mils dedicated to the two building funds. How would that impact our future? Because what they did say is to have the 60 million come out of the state general fund. So I just wanted to know, you said 75 million, so I'm not sure how all of those numbers relate to each other. If you can just kind of educate me on that process, that would be great.
I would probably defer to the agency to give a little more explanation.
Oh, thank you.
No.
All right, questions for Brianna? Okay, seeing none, thank you. Let's go ahead and call the agency up here and see if we can't hammer out some of these last details. Welcome to committee.
Thank you, Chair Sutton. My name is Chad Bristow. I serve as the Director of Facilities for the Board of Regents. Maybe just to take stock of the questions that I've been tracking, Senator Francisco, your question about the criteria that goes into establishing. Is that not on? Okay. All right. Sorry. Based on feedback and concern and questions we've received from this committee, from the the community, a broad range of stakeholders since last fall. We are currently developing a more sophisticated approach to developing criteria to help us establish what an obsolete building is. Right now, by statute and board policy, there's not a very prescriptive level of requirements. That being said, facilities condition has certainly been focused on, and I would just clarify the facilities condition, while it is telling in terms of what a building's current condition is in, it is limited to what that building was when it was constructed. So in terms of the building systems that went into that building, whether or not it has an elevator, or whether or not it has a certain number of accessibility issues with it, do not factor into facilities. So I think you can see there that a more well-rounded criteria is probably what we need to arrive at. And so we are currently working with the universities on iterating what that could be for future definition of an obsolete building, so that the board can make an informed discussion and consideration of that.
Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So has the board authorized the University of Kansas to demolish Smith Hall?
The first answer is the board has approved that Smith Hall would be defined as an obsolete building based on KU advancing that for consideration. And they have approved an allocation of the building demolition fund. What has not been approved is the project as a capital improvement. And in the case of Smith Hall, the estimated project cost puts it into the category of a small capital improvement. And so that would have to come back to the board. I would have to review it. It would be recommended to the board president and CEO for approval, and that has not happened.
Thank you. That helps me understand the process where it is, because I do know that there have been some questions, particularly about what is going to happen with the space once this building is demolished. And I think that would be important for the board to know.
I heard talk of a casino. All right. Actually, though, I am pleased to see, I would like to see that definition fleshed out just a little bit more. Sometimes it seems like we tear down buildings so that we can build new ones. And I'm sure there's more that goes into it than that. But if we don't have that outlined, it's kind of tough to put up a big defense. Although my wife is going to be rather irritated at Butcher getting torn down. That's where she went to grade school. She's going to argue that that's not a building that should be torn down historically. But anyway, all right. Any further questions for the agency? This would be certainly the place to ask. Oh, yes.
Yes.
Senator Reddy.
Yeah, and to your question, and please correct me if I've lost track of this. The 75 million currently is comprised of 45 million from the Educational Building Fund, 20 million, which would be the FY24 Facilities Capital Renewal Initiative additional funding that requires a dollar for dollar university match, and the 10 million then would be another appropriation for the Building Demolition Fund. To your point about the trade-offs, what I would say is if the Educational Building Fund, moved to an appropriation, I think our major concern, as we've expressed, is just the reliability of that moving forward. I mean, it's an 80-year-old plus fund. It's a reliable foundation of funding that we need for facilities, but it is insufficient in terms of what our current projections are. We see that we need at least 3 times that in order to maintain the mission critical buildings. The backlog of deferred maintenance has just bloomed up to 1.2 billion plus. Currently, it's only going to increase if we don't increase the amount of funding. So I'm not sure if that specifically.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my only concern was once the bill goes to the floor and there's a vote, the 1.5 mils that were a dedicated revenue source for both of these funds for I believe the EB Educational Building Fund as well as the State Institutions Building Fund will no longer exist. And the source is going to be the State General Fund and about $75 million. So that needs to be continually brought to the attention of appropriations or Ways and Means or wherever this is going to go. Because oftentimes, like you said, the needs are so much and the $300 million and such. But I fear that that might not be addressed appropriately. So I just wanted to put that on your radar as well as the radar of this committee and for future dialogue. Thank you.
All right, committee, any further questions? Seeing none. All right, I think you nailed them all down. That's perfect.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, now, as I recall, we did not put out a recommendation regarding post-secondary education last week. So I would be looking for a motion today. All right, not seeing a motion, I'm going to make a motion to pass out the post-secondary education system-wide recommendations as per the governor and agency, I think are identical. Do I have a second? Second by Representative Hoffman. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Okay, very good. That will be the response of the committee.
Ms.
Next, yes,
May I be recorded as abstaining?
certainly. Senator Francisco abstained from voting. All right, let's look at next item on the list, the Department of Corrections with Shirley Morrow, and I believe this one's going to be a pretty fulfilling conversation.
Aren't they always when it comes to me?
When you're here, Shirley, they all are. You're right.
Okay, you have a tan sheet of paper in front of you that I just passed out. At the top is in current statute for the traditional lottery revenue distribution. Of the first 50 million, it is split up 4 ways. The first 80,000 is transferred to the Problem Gambling and Addictions Grant Fund. 85% of the remainder is transferred to the EDIF. 10% is transferred to the Correctional Institutions Building Fund, and 5% is transferred to the Juvenile Alternatives to Detention Fund. And you will see right below that the actual breakdown of the dollar amounts.
Okay.
There was discussion during the interim when we were visiting both Lansing and Hutchinson that the 10%, which goes into the Correctional Institutions Building Fund, which according to this diagram is $42,920,000, has been declining. One of the reasons for that, or the only reason for that, is that the Department of Administration takes out from that amount the amount for the corrections buildings, their insurance payment. The insurance payment over the last few years has been increasing. Last year, the insurance payment was $400,000. This year, the insurance payment is $550,000. So that provides less funds from the Correctional Institutions Building Fund for rehab and repair of the buildings. I was asked to put together some scenarios of changing the statutes to provide additional CIBF funds. Now, there's kind of a couple ways I just want to let you all know that you can do that. One would be a simple proviso that says, notwithstanding KSA 794803, we give the CIBF X dollars. That would be a proviso in the appropriations bill. How that's different than changing the statute is that is a proviso for that one time only, unless that proviso stays in the appropriations bill from henceforward, then it would stay. But if it's taken out, then it goes away. So again, in changing the statute, I came up with a scenario that you see below there. If we were to increase and say of the first 60 million, that funding is split in 4 ways. And again, taking out the $80,000 first, changing the 85% to EDIF down to 75%. And you'll notice with the additional of the $10 million, they're still getting more money than they did with the 50 million. I didn't want any of the funding sources to decrease, but that's only 75%. Increasing the CIBF from 10% to 20% would give them 11.9 million, almost $12 million. And then leaving the 5% to the Juvenile Alternatives to Detention Fund at 5%, that gives them an additional 500,000. That's just one scenario. We could work the numbers in a lot of different ways, but that was something that a couple of the committee members had asked me to look into, so I have done that.
Shirley, I'm sure I can look this up somewhere, but because we're here in committee and you're right in front of me, have you followed the fund balances for those 4 respective funds? Is that something that's being fully utilized, or is there something that's growing out of control that we might want to also take into consideration if we're going to be messing with the equation?
Well, unfortunately, the only one that I've been following is the CIBF, and they do spin that down to 0. So I would have to look up the Problem Gambling and Addictions Grant Fund. I believe that's in KDAD's budget. And then I'm not sure on the Juvenile Alternatives to Detention, but I could get that for you.
Excellent. And then EDIF, yeah, we're pretty familiar with that one.
Yeah.
Everybody takes from that one and gives to that one, and it's just a big old fun thing to look at.
Now, the other thing I will note is, and I do have some history of, because once those funds come out, and you'll notice at the bottom there from the remaining balance, some of the money goes to the veterans programs, $8 million on ticket vending machines is transferred to mental health, and the remaining is transferred into the state general fund. Just to give you some perspective, and I don't have just last year's actuals, but in fiscal year 2021, the transfer to SGF was a little under $20 million. So this would reduce it by 10.
Okay, and that was a transfer of $20 million after the 9.2s yanked?
Everything comes out.
Interesting. All right, committee. Questions for Shirley? Yes.
Jan. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I thought that we self-funded our insurances.
That's a very complicated situation. We do self-fund, but we do have, and I may be using the wrong word, but I'm going to call it catastrophic insurance through Travelers.
And that's what's costing 500,000.
Travelers provides an invoice to the Department of Administration. And again, Travelers has provided Department of Administration some reasons why their, in essence, bill has gone up over the last year. And it again increased from 400 to 550,000.
Okay.
25% increase is pretty significant, though.
Oh, and I just received notice that for fiscal year 22, the transfer to state general fund was 21.5 million. So it's going up.
Excellent. All right. Yes, Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I've been concerned, looking at the, funds available to our corrections facilities, and understand it has been limited by this statute, that talks about splitting the 50 million. So, I would like to add a, statement to, our message to Ways and Means and Appropriations, that we would ask those two groups to look at an increase in the lottery revenue distribution from 50 million to 60 million to address some of these problems. We've been able in some of our other budgets to look at increasing the amount that is available for repair and rehab. Having just been on the tour this last fall, I think that there are places where these funds need to be spent. So,
Yes, Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I believe that, I don't know whether it would necessarily come out of this, because I think we're talking more than what this fund is for, but we've got a couple of the women's prison right out here in Topeka is in need of some major renovation. So probably some more money into that fund probably is a good idea.
Senator Reddy. Doritos in my mouth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I just want to know if you can provide maybe a trend or a spreadsheet for the just past not, maybe the past 2 or 3 years wouldn't be showing the norm. What I'm trying to see is the $8 million net profits from the self-serving ticket vending machines transferred to the mental health programs. So in Manhattan, we just have for the past 3 years, we were able to put up a stabilization crisis center because of this funding source. And and there was a statute passed that was dedicated funding source from the vending machines that go to mental health programs. But I wanted to know if there's a breakdown of how much of it goes to the community health centers, or the breakdown of that 8 million, I suppose, on what do we mean by mental health programs? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
That one you can hunt down for us.
Martin would love to do that.
Oh, Martin is on the job. All right, there you go. All right, committee, further questions, comments, or discussion? Seeing none. All right, then I would entertain a motion regarding the Department of Corrections. Senator Francisco.
thank you, Mr. Chair. I would move that we concur with the agency's and governor's recommendations for the Department of Corrections. And I think, is it 23, 24, or years? 23, 24, with the note that we believe the funding from Correctional Institutionals Building Fund is inadequate, and would ask the committee's Appropriations and Ways and Means to look at a distribution of $60 million and consider appropriating 75% to economic development initiatives, 20% to corrections, and 5% to the Juvenile Alternatives to Detention Fund.
Second, sorry.
All right, and it's been seconded by Senator Reddy. So what you basically described was the formula here that Shirley worked out as an alternative. Okay, very good. All right, it's been Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye. Opposed, say nay. All right, very good. Well, let's look then, that will be our committee recommendation. Let's look again at Department of Administration for just one moment. I don't think anyone needs to come to the well unless, you know, things go pear-shaped real quickly, but I don't anticipate that. But I would like to amend the committee recommendation, and I'll make the motion to amend the committee recommendation to include uh, 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 consideration of committee rooms being added in the docking building reconstruction, not refurbishment, because we already discussed that. It's not, it is a reconstruction. And so I just wanted to have that on the table for, I don't know if it'll move anywhere, but butterfly effect, I want to have at least the discussion out there about adding committee rooms to that facility so that maybe we can release some of the overcrowding that we have here in the Capitol building. So that will be my motion. Do I have a second? Second by Representative Owsley. Discussion? Yes, Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm trying to think if there's any other activities in the Capitol that could be moved to docking and free up space for committee rooms in the Capitol itself. I do remember when people went to docking during the renovation for committee meetings, but sometimes the timing is awkward, and if you're a member of the public trying to find a committee room, it's easier if it's in one building. So I was trying to think if there's any other building uses that you might recommend.
I am certainly open to moving other things to that facility as well. I just want this to be part of the conversation because something's got to give somewhere along the lines here. Yes, Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Would you be open to wording that said some use of the docking building that allows for additional committee room space, either in the newly constructed docking building or by shifting other uses from the Capitol to that building?
That would be all right with me if it's all right with the second. Yeah. Yes, Stephen Wu.
Legislative research, Stephen Wu. If I could clarify, so some of the planned blueprints for docking already include some multi-purpose rooms that are meant to be flexible use rooms for event gatherings and such. So trying to figure out how that would fit in with Senator Francisco's recommendation. Just wanted to make sure that it's not duplicative, I suppose.
Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think if it's a committee room, we just need to make sure that it has the connections to our WebEx program that we're now all doing. It has microphones and seating. So probably you wouldn't necessarily want to have a committee room space that doesn't have some identifiable layout of chairs, but certainly you could use it for other things, set it up for committee rooms January through May and have it available for other uses beyond that. I think this is just asking us to think about what we can do to increase the number of committee rooms available.
I 100% agree. Yes, Representative Owsley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm glad you brought it up because, you know, not only does House K-12 every day meet in the small committee room up on the 5th floor, tucked in the corner, and oftentimes have an overflowing crowd if we could find some larger space for that, that would be nice. But then also, I was just trying to help the hospital in my district get a room for their lunch, day at the Capitol. And we couldn't hardly find a committee room even to get them in and serve lunch. And we know on the fourth floor, oftentimes there's, the page lunches out there, whatnot, out in the hall causing noise outside of my office. I'm not complaining. It's just a matter of fact. So I think we should have the conversation and throw it out there. So thank you.
Very good. All right. Yes, Representative Delperdang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm trying to find out, maybe you would have the answers, I don't know, but will we, when the construction is done over here, continue to have a tunnel access from this building to that? Because it seems like, which depends on what day of the week when I ask the question, I get a different answer, and not everybody in this committee is privy to all the information.
My understanding of the plans is that, yes, the tunnel connecting the State House to the docking building will be preserved.
And a zip line added, right?
Respectfully, no comment.
That's not a no. You're saying there's a chance. Remodel the tunnel? Put in a little tram? Yeah. Be like a Bond movie. That'll be awesome. All right. Any further questions, comments? Right, it's been moved and it's been seconded and it's been revised and then moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Very good. I understand it's already been, DFA has already been reported out to the Senate, but that will be the recommendation for the House for appropriations. Remind me of that when we get there. All right. Next item on the list. Regards the HVAC for KBI. So Merle is here to shine a light into our confusion.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to be referencing 3 documents. You'll see a yellow document with a header that says matter referred to the Joint Committee on State Building Construction. You'll see a white document that says Kansas Bureau of Investigation. This is testimony provided by the agency. And then you'll see a gold document that says capital improvements. This is the agency's capital improvements budget request that was considered by this committee. I'm just going to quickly start on the yellow document, and this relates to the House Committee on Appropriations requests the Joint Committee on State Building Construction further review the Kansas Bureau of Investigation's request of $910,000 SGF for replacement of an HVAC system at the Great Bend Laboratory in FY 2024. The next paragraph briefly describes that project, which was outlined in the agency's budget capital improvement request. A little background on how we got to where we are today on this. You'll see under the header background, looking at the second paragraph, the agency submitted an enhancement request to the 2023 legislature for additional operational support for FY24, which included increased expenditures for rehabilitation and repair of agency facilities, 200,000 SGF, and replacement of an HVAC system at the Great Bend Laboratory, 910 SGF. The agency at the time did note that a request for federal ARPA funds was submitted to the Spark Task Force. The governor's recommendation to the 2023 legislature included increased expenditures for rehabilitation and repair, 200,000, but did not include funding for the Great Bend HVAC. So the governor said 200 for rehabilitation repair, no to the HVAC. The governor recommended that federal ARPA funds be pursued. Joint Building Committee heard this agency's capital improvement budget on February 2nd, 2023. The committee concurred with the governor's recommendation, meaning that funding for the Great Bend HVAC was not recommended. The House Budget Committee on Transportation and Public Safety heard the agency's budget request, which includes capital improvements, on February 7th. There, the agency reported that the ARPA funds for the Great Bend HVAC had not been approved and noted the system was over 50 years old. So the House Budget Committee recommended adding that funding of $910,000 SGF for the Great Bend HVAC in 2024. Finally, we get to the House Committee on Appropriations, heard the Budget Committee's recommendation. The House Committee deleted that 910,000 SGF for the Great Bend HVAC, referred the matter to this party, and will consider and is really looking for a recommendation and reconsideration by this committee on that HVAC. And then the House Committee on Appropriations will reconsider it at a later point. So I can stand for questions. We do have representatives from the agency if there's specific questions for them.
All right. And the main part that I was missing out on was the fact that we had dished this off to ARPA at one point, then the ARPA funds were denied. And that's the part where I had missed a step in the process, why I was confused. Questions from the committee? At over 40 years old or 50 years old, I think the alternative, this is just my position on this, we either have to fund that or buy a bunch of fans and space heaters, because at that point, I don't believe that HVAC system is going to be functional enough to be called HVAC. Yes, Senator, or now I'm demoting my own guys here.
You can
Representative Owsley.
you can call a representative a senator, but you can't call a senator a representative. Is the $200 increase in repair and rehab, is that an annual increase only, or is that going to be in the budget ongoing?
That would be for rehabilitation repair. Typically, that is an allocation that becomes part of the agency's base budget. So they remain they've previously had 100,000. They've recommended an increase of 200,000. So that agency should retain a level of 300,000 for the coming years for rehabilitation repair. But that is for all of the agency's facilities.
Okay. And that's what memory was serving me, but I just wanted to double check while we were here. Thank you.
And again, we're going back quite a ways here, but if I'm recalling correctly, that's still going to leave them deferring some maintenance. I don't think that's going to be the total answer anyway. It's going to be a whole lot better than it was. All right, Senator Reddy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Why was it not funded by the ARPA funds? It seems like a one-time funding source. HVAC seems to deal a lot with also air ventilation and COVID and all of these things. Why was it denied?
Mr. Chairman, Senator, I couldn't tell you exactly why it was denied. The agency may have some additional insight. At this point, all I can tell you is that it was denied.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Right. When you have a jump ball, only one team gets the ball. This is kind of what those ARPA hearings were all about. Jump ball. Or Hungry Hungry Hippos, if you remember that game. Yeah. All right, committee, in further discussion? Yes, Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just would note that my understanding is this is for lab facilities. Is that the case? And so a ventilation system for a laboratory is more complex than just heating and cooling. I'm not sure you can use space heaters to get the things in the air out that should be. So, I think to use the labs, we probably should be funding this. We've been very lucky as a state to get the monies that we did for our KDHE laboratories that we were otherwise going to pay for out of our state general fund. I don't know if there's any interest in, reducing it by 50 or 100,000 and assuming some of that can be covered by the increase in R&R.
I'm personally, speaking for myself, not given to splitting the hairs on $50,000 out of a $910,000 ask. Again, the 300,000 isn't going to be enough to keep them from deferring maintenance anyway. From from past experience looking at that budget. So, so I would anticipate that my recommendation would be to fund fully the $910,000 ask. Yes, Representative Dumperding.
Thank you. So this is on KBI, right? And the KBI's main lab is a couple blocks from here. So what exactly do they do at Great Bend? How critical is the system to whatever they're doing in Great Bend?
Correct, Mr. Chairman. So the KBI operates multiple labs. I believe there is 3 labs total to include the main lab on the Washburn campus. It's my understanding that they either deal with evidence that's submitted regionally, or there may be some difference in the laboratory services that are provided at the different labs. I couldn't tell you exactly what the distinction is between, but perhaps the agency could address that.
And is the agency here before we approve $1 million? I'd kind of like to know what we're doing with it. Thank you, Chairman.
Very good. We do have members from the agency here, I believe. Who drew the short straw?
Exactly what we were trying to figure out.
I saw the discussion.
Chairman Sutton, members of the committee, my name is Robert Jacobs. I'm the executive officer at the Kansas Bureau of Investigation. So the KBI actually maintains 4 laboratories across the state. We have one in Kansas City, Kansas, one in Pittsburgh, one in Topeka here, which is our main laboratory, as well as one in Great Bend. The Great Bend laboratory is the one that we're discussing here. It has several different disciplines that it takes. Merle was correct. We do take evidence submissions regionally. So the Great Bend Laboratory does service most of western Kansas as well as part of the central corridor of Kansas. They have latent fingerprints, biology, chemistry, and I don't think they don't have firearms and they don't have toxicology there, but they have all the others. And so we do they do service quite a bit. That building has been was built in the 70s. We purchased it in 2009. This HVAC system is currently 44 years old. It has not been replaced since then. This is a two-phase project. We started the project in 2020, I believe, and we completed the first phase. This is the second phase of it. There were some problems with the first phase when they actually completed the first renovation part. The building started to address or have humidity issues. And so we went back to the engineers. We talked about that. This second phase is what's going to fix that. Part of doing it now is that we want to do, instead of breaking it up even more, is if we only fix one piece of it, there's 2 actual HVAC systems. If we only fix one, we'll have to tear out stuff that we just repaired to fix the second one. So we're trying to do it all at once and not have to duplicate that work later is the answer. So.
Okay. Efficiency and non-duplication, those words have no bearing here in state government. I'd like you to correct yourself immediately. All right. Yes, Representative Alcala.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So could the Topeka facility pick up the Great Bend's work, being that it's so close, to turn over to send it back? Lead time to get it back would not be tremendous.
That is correct. The amount of transportation of evidence back and forth, it causes delays in the judicial system, in the courts, as well as everything, as well as with the local agencies with investigations. It would create quite a bit of delays in that process. So,
what do you guesstimate that delay would be? A day, half a day?
Honestly, I don't. It would be tough for me to guesstimate that. I would be happy to talk to our laboratory director and get an answer for you. I just don't know what that is. We do submit and transfer evidence currently across the state when we needed to. For example, toxicology, all of the DUIs, everything that happens around the state all goes to Topeka. So there is a transfer of evidence currently, but this would greatly enhance that if we didn't have that laboratory in Great Bend.
And the capacity to get this done in Topeka is, I mean, there's not an issue with, oh, we can't get it done, we're too full, or, we won't be able to get to it till next week. My understanding is they turn stuff over there pretty quick. Is that your understanding?
True. We do have an efficient system, as most efficient as we can. That's not to say that there aren't backlogs. There are in some disciplines, and shutting down one particular laboratory would certainly cause that. Would increase some of that. So.
Yeah, well, my thought wasn't about shutting it down, but I do fall into, I know there's duplication of services, but I also know that a lot of stuff comes to Topeka that goes back. And the reason I asked him what he thought the time frame would be that would make it longer than what it would be doing it in-house was because I was curious, because I'm just my opinion. I don't think it would be that long, but he didn't have an answer. So kind of leaves that up in the air. Is it 1 day, half a day, 2 days? I'm, I'm aware of the ramifications if something doesn't get back and we have a court date scheduled, but I don't think that happens that often. So, but I don't work in that office. So this is a guy's opinion from the outside looking in, deciding whether we want to spend that much money there. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And I think that's a valid conversation. Do we have more assets than we need with regards to labs and that sort of thing? I'm not sure personally if the way to go about correcting that is to ignore the building, make them work in a tent. I'm not sure that's the way to go about it, but I think it's a valid discussion and one that we need to have is what assets are necessary? What is the right size for KPI? I think it's valid. I really don't want to take that on in this committee, however, but I think that is a valid discussion to have. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My intent wasn't to not approve it, but to send the message out there that moving forward, I agree with you, we can't let the building fall apart. Just moving forward, it would be something to look at because it will be a question that, I'll bring up later on, and they are going to come back for more money. What have we done differently, though, to streamline that process?
Very good. Right, further discussion, committee. Seeing none, then I would entertain a motion. Representative Owsley.
I move we approve the 900, how do I even say it?
110,000.
Yeah, 910,000 SGF for the Great Bend Laboratory HVAC system.
All right, you've heard the motion by Representative Owsley. A second. Second by Representative Hoffman. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Very good. That will be the committee recommendation. All right, committee. I don't have anything else on the agenda for today or any other day right now. So I guess this would be sine die because there's no definite date, but keep an eye out when things arise. Our committee will be there to jump into the breach and solve the problems. So until your next notification, we are adjourned.